Hello, welcome to one of my talks in a series of 200 talks on the history of Western art. Now, I've divided these talks into sections. This is section 15 on academic art, and this particular lecture is on Nicolas Poussin. Now, Poussin was born in Normandy, France, at the end of the 16th century to a noble but impoverished family. And it was clear from the beginning that he had a remarkable artistic talent, and his education included some Latin, which proved valuable later when he studied classical texts. His parents opposed a career in art, possibly because they didn't think it was suitable for a member of the nobility, but he defied them, fled to Paris when he was 18 and studied art under some minor masters, including the study of engravings of old masters like Raphael and Giulio Romano. In 1624, when he was 30, he went to Rome, and he lived there for most of the rest of his life. And there he studied the works of Renaissance masters, particularly Raphael, and contemporary Baroque painters, though he famously detested Caravaggio style. In Rome, he met wealthy patrons of the city and produced religious, mythological and historical paintings. And between 1640 and 42, he returned to Paris and worked as first painter to the king. But he couldn't get on with the court politics and the pressure to produce decorative work, which was contrary to his artistic vision and caused him great distress. So he went back to Rome and worked for a small group of discerning collectors. His style evolved towards greater austerity and intellectual rigour, and he increasingly turned to landscape painting. Later in life, his hands began to tremble. Not sure why, possibly Parkinson's disease, but he managed to continue working. And in 1665, aged 71, he died in Rome, leaving behind no children, but a profound artistic legacy that was to influence French artists, including David, Ingres, and even Cézanne. So, this is an early work. 3 years after he arrived in Rome. It's The Death of Germanicus. He finished it in 1627, and it's his first major history painting. It was commissioned by Cardinal Francesco Barberini, who was a significant patron, recognised Poussin's talent and helped him get established in Rome, which was very competitive for artists because they all flocked to Rome because there were a lot of wealthy patrons. What we see here is the deathbed scene of the Roman general Germanicus, who, according to historical legend or accounts, was poisoned by his jealous adoptive father, the Emperor Tiberius. And you can see here the composition demonstrates Poussin's emerging classical style, carefully arranged figures, always in an architectural setting, emotionally restrained, despite the tragic subject matter. He always avoids melodrama, focuses on stoic heroism and dignified grief. And this reflected his philosophical interests, his study of ancient Roman art, particularly sarcophagus reliefs, and that influenced his painting, where you'll see a lot of his paintings have a sort of frieze-like arrangements of the figures in the foreground. What we see is Germanicus's final moments when he's asking his friends to avenge his murder, and he's imploring his wife Agrippina to endure her sorrow with courage. And this theme of noble suffering in the face of injustice resonated with Poussin's educated patrons who valued such classical moral lessons. Technically, the painting shows Poussin's developing mastery of colour and light, the rich red and blues, of the soldiers' garments, contrasting with the pale figure of Germanicus. This painting became highly influential and in fact established a template for deathbed scenes that would be emulated by artists for the next 2 centuries. Its impact was so significant that when the Barberini family finally sold it in 1958 to the Minneapolis Institute of Art, it was considered a major acquisition for American collectors of European art. And like all of his paintings, it exemplifies his belief that art should appeal to the intellect as well as the emotions. This is The Triumph of David, 1631 to 33, another one of his early masterpieces. It's in the Dulwich Picture Gallery in South London and captures the dramatic moment David processes through Jerusalem in triumph after defeating the Philistine champion Goliath. And you can see in the centre that they're holding Goliath's head on a stick. It's the scene as described in the book of Samuel. 1631 was an important moment in his career because he began to attract significant patronage. This painting was, like the last, probably commissioned by Cardinal Francesco Barberini, who was nephew of the Pope Urban VIII. And he, as I said, was one of Poussin's earliest and most important patrons. And the family was crucial for his career advancement in Rome. It's organised with architectural precision. It uses the classical columns and buildings to frame the scene. And he's created this stage-like setting with the figures arranged like a frieze across the painting. The painting is particularly fascinating, I think, because of the psychological insight into the human emotions. There's a whole spectrum of human reactions to the victory of David, from the solemn thanksgiving of an old man to the joyful abandon of young women with their arms raised high in celebration. Mothers with children display various degrees of comprehension, some children nestling in confusion, others play oblivious of the historical significance. And this attention to emotional nuance reveals Poussin's interest in theatrical language of human gesture, which would continue throughout his career. X-ray analysis shows that he reworked the composition several times while he was painting it, modifying the background architecture and the foreground figures. The technical evidence provides fascinating insights into his working methods, showing a meticulous approach to composition and his willingness to revise until he achieved the perfect balance. And also the painting's political significance can't be overlooked. In the context of 17th century Rome, biblical narratives of triumph were often interpreted as allegories for contemporary political situations, and the Barberini family, who had risen to prominence with the election of Pope Urban VIII, may have seen parallels between David's triumph and their own ascendancy. So by commissioning works like this, they could subtly communicate their political aspirations. I said it was in the Dulwich Picture Gallery. It was acquired in 1811 and was acquired from the Borghese bequest. It was one of the earliest public art galleries in England. That's the Dulwich Picture Gallery. And the gallery was founded by a Swiss-born artist and dealer called Sir Francis Bourgeois, and he acquired the painting during the tumultuous period after the French Revolution, when discerning collectors could acquire many works from art that were being sold by members of the nobility. This is the Abduction of the Sabine women, painted around 1633 to 34, a very ambitious and dynamic composition. It's a large canvas. It's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York now, and it stands a testament to Poussin's mastery of complex narrative scenes. The story is concerned with the abduction of the Sabine women by the first Romans, who, lacking wives to build their new society, invited their neighbours, the Sabines, to a festival, and then they forcibly seized the women and fought off the men, as you can see here. He arrived in Rome in 1624. He spent nearly a decade immersing himself in the study of classical antiquity and the Renaissance masters. He was meticulous both in his painting methods, but also in the care to which he took to create the scene exactly as he wanted to create it. He would arrange wax figures in a miniature theatre-like box to create the perfect spatial relationships and the correct formal balance before he started painting. This particular painting belonged to the French ambassador to Rome in the 1630s, and from there it entered the collection of Cardinal Richelieu, King Louis XIII's powerful chief minister. And that, I think, reflects the high esteem Poussin was held in even before his brief return to France, when he became, for a short while, first painter to the king. The central figure here in the background is Romulus with a red cloak. It's a sort of focal point from which the violence radiates. The Roman seizing the Sabine women is, although dynamic, it's almost frozen the moment in time. It's a bit like a theatrical tableau vivant. The architectural backdrop again places the figures in a classical landscape and establishes the Roman setting to provide a sort of structural stability to the chaotic scene. And there again, the vibrant colours, blues, reds, golds, set against earthy tones. The Adoration of the Golden Calf, a dramatic incident from the Bible, painted in 1633 to 34, currently now in the National Gallery in London. It's an infamous episode from the book of Exodus when the Israelites, growing impatient during Moses' absence on Mount Sinai, persuade Aaron to create a golden idol for them to worship. Poussin had by this time established himself in Rome, had gained recognition among elite patrons. He was becoming much sought after, and this particular painting was commissioned by Amedeo dal Pozzo, who was a cousin of his patron Cassiano dal Pozzo, who was a renowned collector. The family was crucial for Poussin establishing himself in Rome. And the composition demonstrates Poussin's mastery of narrative and the creation of dramatic tension. There's the golden calf in the centre, elevated on an altar. Around it, he's arranged multiple figures in various states of celebration and worship. In the upper left corner, Moses and Joshua descend from Mount Sinai, and you can see Moses in the act of breaking the tablets of the Ten Commandments in his anger at this idolatry. Aaron, Moses' brother, is the one depicted in the white robe, centre right, and he's the one who facilitated the creation of the idol by melting down the Israelites' gold jewellery. The political and religious significance would have been readily apparent in the 17th century. In Counter-Reformation Rome, the biblical story was a powerful warning against idolatry and religious deviation, central concerns for the Catholic Church following the Protestant Reformation. Now, Poussin's patrons were closely connected to the papal circles, and so this would completely align with and reinforce their orthodox Catholic doctrines. It's again carefully arranged in a theatrical manner that guides the viewer's eyes across the canvas. The pointing hands create visual pathways leading from one group to another and ultimately to Moses in the background. The painting was purchased by the National Gallery in 1945, partly thanks to contributions from the Art Fund. And this was an important moment just after, just after the end of World War II, when many significant artworks were changing hands. And this one went from a private Italian collection to the public British institution. This is an interesting painting, A Dance to the Music of Time, 1634 to 36, one of his most enigmatic and philosophically rich works. It's currently housed in London in the Wallace collection, and it was commissioned by Giulio Rospigliosi, who was another Roman patron, later to become Pope Clement IX, showing the high circles in which Poussin was now moving. We see 4 dancing figures symbolising the seasons. They're moving in a circular pattern to music played by the winged father of time on his lyre. It was created during a period when Poussin had firmly established himself in Rome and was developing his mature classical style of harmony, balance and intellectual depth. He had at this time declined an invitation to return to France from Louis XIII, and he was free to pursue commissions in Rome. It's a complex painting showing Poussin's erudition, his engagement with classical literature and his Renaissance humanism. And although the exact interpretation is still debated, it's generally understood as a meditation on the cyclical nature of human existence. So the dancing figures represent the perpetual cycle of the human condition, from poverty to labour to riches to pleasure and back to poverty again. The interpretation aligns with the Neo-Stoic philosophy, which at the time was popular amongst educated Romans. Technically, it shows his masterful handling of figural compositions. The dancers create this rhythmic movement across the canvas, and their expressions are one of serene detachment. The background, the landscape, provides atmosphere and a timeless backdrop. Particularly notable, I think, are the 2 putti in the foreground, one blowing bubbles and the other holding an hourglass, both symbols of the passing of time, a memento mori, reminding viewers of life's transience. It remained in the Rospigliosi family until at least 1713, when it was acquired by Cardinal Fesch, Napoleon's uncle, and then the 4th Marquis of Hertford purchased it in 1845, and it eventually led to its current home in the Wallace collection. This painting has also inspired a 12-volume novel sequence of the same name by Anthony Powell. The Arcadian shepherds, sometimes called et in Arcadia ego, and it can be translated as even in Arcadia I exist. It's perhaps his most well-known and influential work, now in the Louvre in Paris. The figures are examining an inscription on a carved in stone on what looks like a tomb, reading the inscription et in Arcadia ego, and this work represents his second treatment of the theme. There's an earlier version, let me show you, the one shown here now in Chatsworth House in the UK, and you can see the contrast between the two and the way that in a few years Poussin's artistic treatment of the subject has evolved towards a greater classical restraint, more a deeper philosophical vision. He's stripped away the dramatic elements of the earlier version and created this austere, harmonious, perfectly balanced version in his mature classical style. It was perhaps his most productive period at Rome at this time, and it was following his decision to return to Rome after his a period in Paris as first painter. It is shown again, the figures are in a frieze-like manner shown across the picture plane, and that I think creates a balanced, harmonious structure. The landscape is idealised, but it's convincing. It's carefully modulated, showing recession into space. The colour scheme again is characteristic, warm earth tones contrasting with cooler blues and the striking yellow of the female figure's drapery. Now, the translation I mentioned, even in Arcadia I exist, is generally interpreted as even in Arcadia, which was a mythical paradise, I, death, exist. So the painting is a profound meditation on mortality. And the shepherds showing varied reactions to this memento mori, ranging from contemplation to surprise. And it's inviting viewers, I think, to reflect on their own mortality. The well-known art historian Erwin Panofsky famously analysed the work as representing the evolution of the pastoral tradition from medieval to modern sensibilities, when death is no longer depicted as a terrifying spectre, but as a melancholic reminder of life's transience, particularly resonant in the 17th century because at that time plague and war were ever-present concerns. It's a painting that has inspired numerous generations of artists, and so there are many imitations, references to this work and copies across Europe. It inspired books as well, like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, where the tomb was reinterpreted as containing a secret message about Jesus's bloodline. And these fanciful interpretations, although historically unfounded, testify to the power of this painting and its ability to capture the imagination. This is landscape with the Ashes of Fios, and it was completed in 1648, he was at the height of his career and the height of his mature period at this time. It's in the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. And it's a poignant moment from ancient Greek history. The widow of Phocion, who was an Athenian general unjustly executed for treason in the 4th century BCE, secretly collects her husband's ashes, which had been scattered outside the city. And they were scattered to prevent his ashes being buried, and the scattering was a further punishment. So his wife is collecting the ashes in order to properly bury them according to tradition. Poussin, was firmly established in his reputation, and by this time, I think I mentioned it earlier, he'd started to develop tremors in his hands, possibly due to Parkinson's disease, but his technical mastery, as you can see, remained undiminished. This work was commissioned by a wealthy French silk merchant, and it shows how his work was sought after by collectors across Europe. It's a meditation, I think, on virtue persisting in the face of injustice, how the widow is risking her own safety to perform proper funeral rites. This is the Holy Family on the Steps, completed the same year, 1648. Again, harmonious, contemplative, religious composition. It's now in the Cleveland Museum of Art in Ohio. It's the Holy Family are in a classical setting, Mary at the centre, presenting the Christ child to the world, Saint Elizabeth and the infant John the Baptist at the left, and Saint Joseph with his carpenter tools sitting at the right. It was likely commissioned by a sophisticated French patron, possibly one of the intellectual circle around the Barberini family. And again, it exemplifies Poussin's meticulous working method. He created small wax models of figures for this work. He put them in a box pierced with holes in order to study different lighting effects. And this methodical approach allowed him to achieve a perfect balance and harmony. You can see St. John the Baptist is offering Christ an apple, perhaps representing humanity's fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. St. Elizabeth leans forward to foretell Christ's eventual sacrifice. St. Joseph holds, it's difficult to see, but he has a compass symbolising his earthly role as a carpenter and his spiritual role as earthly representative of God. And Poussin has, in this case, created a composition with strict geometric precision, a clear triangular arrangement of the figures which creates stability and focus. Again, the colours are the primary colours, red, blue and yellow, in pure form to reinforce the painting's spiritual message. And the handling of light, I think, is particularly notable in this painting with its clear, even illumination. This is the Judgment of Solomon, completed in 1649. It's an accomplished narrative painting from his mature period, now in the Louvre. And it's the story from the Book of Kings, where King Solomon resolves a dispute between two women. They're both claiming to be the mother of the same child, and Solomon proposing to cut the baby in half. And by doing so, he reveals the true mother through her willingness to give up her claim rather than see the child harmed. It was particularly significant, this painting, in Poussin's career. By 1649, he'd been in Rome for over 2 decades, become the preeminent painter of his generation. This work was commissioned by a wealthy French merchant, Jean Pointel, one of Poussin's important patrons at this time, a sophisticated collector with refined tastes. It's set in a grand architectural space, Solomon enthroned at the centre. It has a deep emotional power, I think, derived from Poussin's ability to capture the precise moment of highest tension with the executioner's raised sword and the true mother lunging forward to stop it happening, while the willing to surrender her claim rather than see her child killed, while the false mother, in contrast, kneels impassively on the right, revealing her callousness. The political significance, of course, can't be overlooked. It was a period of political instability in France, and this shows the image of a wise ruler dispensing perfect justice, which would have resonated with contemporary viewers, particularly Poussin's French patrons. Blind Orion searching for the rising sun, 1658. An ambitious work, a poetic late landscape, now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, shows Orion, who was blinded as punishment by a king after Orion attempted to rape the king's daughter. And in this scene, Orion carries the dwarf Cedelian on his shoulders, who's guiding the blind giant towards the rising sun in the east. The idea is that the sun will restore his sight because of the sun's healing rays. Poussin was by this time increasingly debilitated by tremors in his hand, but he can still, as you can see, create a masterpiece with remarkable technical precision and control despite his declining health. It was commissioned by Michel Passart, who was an important patron who collected landscapes by Poussin and Claude Lorraine. Its unusual mythological subject, the text, is primarily from the ancient Greek writer Lucian, and the work was supplemented by the 16th century mythographer Natalis Comes, whose commentary provides the source of the images in this painting. And what he's done is he's integrated various meteorological subtexts. Diana, representing the moon, is shown in the clouds. Vapours rise from the earth, symbolising the natural cycle of evaporation and rainfall. So there are many sophisticated layers of meaning in the painting, so that it would engage the intellect of the patrons as well as their visual sense. He, again, despite his limitations, shows remarkable precision in the minute brushworks of for example, the foliage. If you look at the foliage and the anatomical details, it's a balanced composition, and the painting itself ended up in America. It was originally in the French collection until the 20th century, and it was bought in 1924 through the Fletcher Fund, and represented a growing American appreciation for French classicism, and it helped establish the Met's reputation for housing masterpieces of European art. This is the last work. I'm going to show you 1660 to 64, near his death in 1665. It's Spring, the Earthly Paradise. And it's the first painting in his final masterpiece series, The Four Seasons, currently in the Louvre. It shows Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before the fall, surrounded by lush vegetation, abundance, the perfection of spring in its primordial state, created in the last years of Poussin's life, when his hands were beginning to tremble uncontrollably, it's said. And despite this, he demonstrates, look again at the foliage, extraordinary technical accomplishments. It was commissioned by the Duc de Richelieu, who was nephew of the famous Cardinal Richelieu, one of Poussin's most important patrons. The Four Seasons is a profound meditation on the relationship between human history and natural cycles, and each painting in the series corresponds not only to a season but to a specific biblical or historical moment. As I said, spring, shown here, represents Adam and Eve in paradise, symbolising the dawn of human history in a state of innocence and harmony with nature. Again, it's a very good example of his mature style and his interest in landscape at this time, vistas of trees and distant mountains, subtle hints of a divine presence in the form of the luminous clouds and the figure shown in the clouds above. Again, showing his mastery of colour and light. The palette is dominated by rich greens of various tones, creating this verdant abundance appropriate for spring and paradise. It was the series was first exhibited just after Poussin's death, and critics were struck by how these final works seemed to transcend the artist's earlier classical style and achieve a new level of poetic expression, anticipating aspects of the romantic landscape tradition much later, about over a century later. The art historian Anthony Blunt, who wrote a definitive study of Poussin, described spring as revealing the grandeur and power of nature in her benign aspect. Which brings me to the end of one of my 200 talks that I'm recording on the history of Western art. And this particular talk, as I said, has been on Nicolas Poussin, and that brings me to the end. I hope you enjoyed your time with me, and I look forward to doing some more research and producing further talks for you. So thank you and goodbye for now.